Okay, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate, and today I'm going to be going over what I read in January. I wanted to do this live just because I think it's more fun, and I don't have to edit it, so it makes it much easier for me. Um, and I'm going to be doing this in the form of a tier list. It just seems like the most fun way to do it. So feel free to comment as I go through the books that I read in January. I was participating in TBRathon, which was created by Leandra over at Leandra the TBR Zero. Once I do this tier list, I'll have all of her channel information linked down below if you want to check it out. It was super fun to participate in. As far as whether or not I actually hit all 20 books that I had on my TBR, obviously, no, I did not make it. I did my best, but I didn't quite make it. Hello. Good to see you, or virtually anyway. So I ended up reading 15 books, and I had two books that I started but didn't finish, but they're ones I felt like I could at least talk about, so I'll mention those as well. I'll shift this guy over so that I can see comments while I do this. Yes. Okay, so I have my tier list here. They're pretty standard categories. So Nope at the bottom is either a DNF or something I just flat out didn't enjoy anything about it. I think this month I really just had um, one book that I would put, or just the DNFs that are in that category, mediocre. I couldn't help but think of Mad Max for that one. Just books that weren't really for me. Goldfish territory, what I mean is that I don't think they're very memorable, or I think they were just okay as reads. And then I have So Close, which is mostly in the 4-star range. I really enjoyed it, but it is not a new favorite, as the top of the list says there. So um, I'll go ahead and dive into the books. And I have these roughly in the order in which I read them. And then one last caveat before I continue is that the first 4 books that are in this list, I did do a vlog for, so I will put a link to that as well if you want to see more detailed thoughts on those. So the first one I have to talk about is House of Bane and Blood by Alexis L. Menard. This is a romantasy. I'm still trying to figure out what I like in romantasy. I read this for a booktuber favorites. My friend Cassidy over at Covers with Cassidy really loves this series, and I really, really liked the first half of this. The first half of this was brilliant. It's a steampunk romantasy that kind of has like Peaky Blinders or Six of Crows vibes, where you have the two main characters are part of like rival families and end up entering into an arranged marriage to save one of their families. And the banter between them, top tier. So much fun. I liked both of the main characters a lot. And then in the second half, there were elements of the plot that just felt convenient and that I didn't really like. And it felt like they went from this sort of slow build of tension into um like almost, it's not insta love because you've had the lead up for it, but I didn't really buy how much they fell in love with each other by the end of that first book. So I'm gonna put it in So Close. I think it was really good. I gave it 4 stars. Of the romantasies I've read, I put it closer to the top just because I had a lot of fun with it. Um, but unfortunately, that second half did kind of bring down the enjoyment. I am going to read the sequel to this duology in February as part of the Romantasy-a-thon, readathon, and I'm hoping that'll bring up my enjoyment more. Yeah. Uh, some of these I have hot takes on, so hopefully none that will personally offend you. Um, the next one I have to talk about is one that I think I ran and told Chelsea about as soon as I read it because it was One that I figured I would enjoy, but I was afraid it would let me down, and that's Strange Beasts by Susan J. Morris. This is historical, sort of paranormal mystery that follows the daughter of Moriarty and the daughter of Jonathan Harker from Dracula. And they get tasked with hunting down this killer in Paris in like early 1900s, like just after Gilded Age. Um, the historical detail, top tier. So good because it's not just like info dumps. You feel immersed in Paris in the 1900s. There's a lot of really interesting detail on how the less rich folks were living in Paris in the time period. Like there's areas of what I would consider Paris now, but in the time period were more like outlying areas that they get into. And then the paranormal part was really fun. I do think this gets mentioned as sapphic quite a bit, and it is, but that relationship takes a major backseat to the mystery. So I think you kind of have to be in it for the fun of the mystery and the atmosphere, and then you see the slow build of their partnership, and then eventually the hint of more. I'm really, really hoping that Strange Beasts is going to be a series because there's a lot of really great themes around feminine rage and women supporting women, and not just the two main female characters, but a lot of other women around them supporting other women. So I really loved that thematic element to it and the historical detail. So if you like those things, highly recommend Strange Beasts. Um, and I think I had pulled that was a favorite from Danny Dabbles. And then I picked up Dreadful from my friend Kristen's top books of the year. And I really enjoyed this one. This is by Caitlin Rosakis. I was a little worried it would be too cozy for me. But I honestly really enjoyed it. The humor is really fun. It does have very strong like T Kingfisher vibes in terms of that. I really liked like the whole premise of it is that you have this dread lord who's lost his memory and he just kind of wakes up and he knows there's an evil plan that's supposed to be happening, but he has no idea what it is. And it's just him trying to figure it out and trying not to fall prey to the other dark lords around him. And kind of getting to know the goblin staff and sort of that the previous version of him had a lot of toxic masculinity and awful stuff that he did, and it's sort of that redemption arc for him, and how much can he make up for who he used to be, and how much should people forgive him for who he used to be. So it's funny, but also it has a lot to say. I think the reason it's not a new favorite for me is really just because um, it gets a little repetitive, especially around certain characters that are in this, where I feel like it is a debut. So maybe it's that, and maybe it's just that I don't like super thematically driven books, but it just felt like emphasizing too much on certain subjects. Like the example I'll come up with that I talked about in the vlog too is there's a female dreadlord character, and the amount of times it's mentioned that she uses sex for power is just like, yeah, I get it. I got it. Thank you. We can be done and move on to something else now. It just was too much for me. So really good, but I do have some gripes about that one. Um, And then I picked up I Was a Teenage Slasher. This one's a little sneaky because it was also on Kristen's favorites, but then, Books and Lala also had it on hers. I think she had it as her number 1 pick, and this is by Stephen Graham Jones. It follows, a teenager who basically in West Texas in, like, the '80s who like goes to a party and things go horribly wrong and then he's basically like cursed to kill for revenge. And I don't really like slasher movies. I've just never gotten into them. So I was a little worried I wouldn't like this, even though I really like Stephen Graham Jones's writing style and I just like the kind of things he delves into in his horror. And I loved this. This was like the biggest surprise of the month for me was how much I loved I Was a Teenage Slasher. Um, it's very voicey. It's written in first person. He's kind of like a standard teenage guy, so there's some of that, but just the friendship he has with his best friend Amber as they try and figure out what to do as he's very much an anti-hero because he's killing people, but it's like him and Amber trying to figure out the rules of that, and it was just so much fun to follow, and, it gave me more respect for slashers, honestly, because I really loved the way it outlined some of the rules and the tropes, and anything that manages to shoehorn in Jim Cotta automatically gets an extra vote for me because almost nobody knows about that '80s movie. It's like a gymnast who has to, like, enter some crazy race, and there's a point where he's, like, on a pommel horse kicking people. It's amazing. Dumb, but really amazing. So, I absolutely love that one. Loved it. Um, the next one I have is my first DNF, of the month and the year, I guess. I actually started this in December. I got an early copy of it. It's Watermoon. Of course, now I can't remember the author's name, but I'll have it listed in the description after I get done. And I think this is one that just isn't for me. So I'll go ahead and put it in the nope category because this is not really cozy, but super whimsical. The main character owns like a pawn shop where you can sell your regrets and has this ability to kind of traverse worlds in a very Ghibli-esque way, but not like Spirited Away. It made me think more of like Ponyo, where it's super whimsical and at no point is the magic even attempted to be explained. Um, and I think I could have gotten behind it more. I really don't like whimsical, super whimsical stuff, so that was a problem. But I could have gotten behind it more if I liked the characters. I just didn't. I found her interesting at the very beginning, but then she kind of just turns into like this very grumpy, isolated character. And then there's a sort of love interest who comes in like the second or third chapter, and it's very insta lovey, and he's just like standard science man. There's a point where, like, neutrinos are brought up 4 or 5 times in a single chapter, and it just felt like gibberish, and I couldn't deal. So I think if you love whimsy and you like more of the magical realism, lit fic style thing, you might check out Watermoon. There are some gorgeous special editions for it, but it was super not my cup of tea. I think I made it 26% in, so, like, roughly 100 pages. Not for me. Um, Kinda wish I didn't cut off the titles so much on these, but say la vie. The next one is All That Is Wicked. I should have kept track of authors' names better, but this one I picked up because the Morbidly Curious book club that's over on Instagram, and then I believe the person who runs it, Patches, is now doing them on, YouTube, the live shows for them. She does a lot of true crime, deaths and science focused type books. This is very much true crime, following a guy who, in sort of Victorian age, like right before Jack the Ripper in the US, got away with killing a bunch of people that essentially got in the way of his obsession with this manuscript he developed. And it made me realize how much I don't really like true crime anymore because it's so focused on how this guy was like one of the first recognized psychopaths. I didn't feel like it really delivered on the promise of the synopsis because the synopsis made it seem like there was a team of people like pre-mind hunters, um, that were dedicated to hunting him down. And it was mostly just people in the society interviewing him to see if him being smart made up for him killing people. And I was just like, no. Um, No, shoot. Now I can't think of what his name is. I should have prepared better for this. Um, what was his name? Edward Ruloff. is the name of the guy that it's about. And it's just, he's just off. He just clearly thinks he's smarter than everybody else. He comes up with this linguistics theory that he thinks explains everything about language. So you find out a lot about him. And yeah, he's not super well known, which I think is the author of this did a podcast about him before she wrote this book, and that kind of like developed into the book. And again, I don't think I'm enough of a true crime fan anymore. I don't want to hear about people like this. Like I want to hear about I'd rather talk about the victims and the people that he affected than talk about him. So it was maybe just not for me. Yeah. Yeah. No, he's a thing. I think the other thing that bugged me about this is that she constantly breaks into the narrative to mention an interview with like a present day psychologist or neurologist talking about it, and it just kind of felt a little chaotic to me. Like I think it would probably work great as a podcast, and just for the way I like nonfiction doesn't really work for me. Um, okay, so my first hot take is this next book, which I know is beloved by a lot of fantasy readers on BookTube, and I just have deep frustrations with it. I'm gonna put it in goldfish territory because I don't really know where else to put it. It does not belong in mediocre or nope, but it's definitely not up top either. And that's The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty. I picked it up because my local bookstore, The Tattered Cover, was doing a book club where they were reading it, and I've had it on my list forever. It's historical fantasy that's very heavily based on a specific Chinese dynasty, which I think is if I remember right, is the Han Dynasty. And um, it's super political because it's basically you have a former bandit and a disgraced nobleman's son who end up working together to form a rebellion against this really oppressive emperor and work on overthrowing him, but they have such different philosophies on what ruling and like the next emperor should look like. They kind of start really competing with each other, and you get to see all of that. But I think the biggest problem I have with The Grace of Kings is it's like 600 pages and it feels like a prequel. It's set up for this series, which is then going to follow um some of these main characters and then their children. And it's a lot of setup, and it's also very withdrawn. It's like you're watching, like getting a bird's eye view of what's happening. There's interesting characters in here, but you're not like in events with them. You're watching events happen, and then he'll skip over big events, like, and give you give you like the synopsis of what happened, but you don't actually get to see the event happening with the characters. It's just for someone who's very character driven, um, I don't get enough of that character connection. So I just really didn't enjoy it as much as I was hoping to. It was more of like a 3 star for me. I am gonna try um the next book in the series, The Wall of Storms. Yeah, yeah, agreed. Um, I'm gonna read the next one. It's even longer. It's like 800 pages. So this feels like a huge commitment to me. But I've heard that the next one is more character focused, and that if I don't like the next one, I can safely DNF the series, but that the next one could determine that. So I'm willing to give it a shot. I think Ken Liu's writing is gorgeous. I think he's doing very interesting things, thematically, especially with it. And the politics are top tier. It's just not my kind of storytelling the way he's doing it in this one. Um, then the next one I have is like such a niche audience. It's The Orb of Cairado by Catherine Addison. This is the third novella in the Goblin Emperor series. I love the Goblin Emperor series. Um, well, I love the Goblin Emperor, which follows a half goblin who has to become the emperor of this elven society because everybody else that's in line for the throne has died. And this takes place at the same time as the Goblin Emperor, but in sort of a sister city. And it's this scholar who has been accused of stealing and kicked out of the school for stealing an artifact. And it's basically him clearing his name and solving a mystery. And the mystery was fun, and I liked this character more than the main character in some of the other novellas for Goblin Emperor, which followed a different side character. But it still just doesn't have the magic of Goblin Emperor. Like, the great part of Goblin Emperor is you're following Maya, this half goblin, who is just an absolute sweetheart. And you are going, it's very cozy because you're following him day to day as he learns what it is to be an emperor. And this one was fun. I liked the scholarly part of it, but it also just, he's not as likable as Maya. So I think I'm just always chasing the high of loving cinnamon roll Maya and never finding anything else. Um, so I don't know. Um, I think what I'm going to do is reread Goblin Emperor and then try the novellas again because there's also a lot of like in-world terminology to remember. So I don't know if it's just been too long and maybe I didn't connect because of that, but we'll see. This one just came out on the 31st, so this one is a new release. If you love Goblin Emperor, maybe check it out, but otherwise, it was okay. Um, and then this next one is one that, like, it's a new favorite. I loved this, but I don't know who to recommend this to because I think a lot of people are struggling with it a little more than I did. And this is cut off the title, but it's called Hamajang Luck by Makana Yamamoto. And this is a cyberpunk heist story that features a queer cast, which was brilliant, and a lot of Hawaiian culture in it because the main character comes from, they're basically a family that, like, in the far past, they lived in Hawaii and were part of that culture. And then as climate change happened, essentially, um, ended up coming to this moon where now they are living. So they have that culture still, but it's also in space. And it's the main character, Edie, gets broken out of jail early by an ex friend and potentially something more, um, who is the one who was responsible for putting her in jail in the first place. Oh, them in jail. That's my bad. Edie is non binary, um, lesbian, and all of these other, I think almost the entire crew is lesbian, non-binary, trans, so great representation as far as I can tell. I mean, I'm cis and straight, right? So like I go find people who are actually of that identity to confirm that, but it felt really interesting to me. I really liked seeing that perspective focused on the cyberpunk vibes, immaculate, just brilliantly done. Um, I really love the theme and sort of the atmosphere of them taking on this tech bro and essentially trying to steal his inventions so that they can undermine him because he's just been awful. So it's very much like little guys against the big corporation. So I think where a lot of people are struggling with this is in the heist part of it because it's very standard heist. If you've seen Ocean's 11, if you've read or watched any heist, it has a lot of those same elements. Um, and I think a lot of the problems they've run into in the course of the heist are sort of easily solved. So that's not really, there's not a lot of tension as part of the heist. What really sold it for me are the cyberpunk vibes and the characters who I absolutely adored. There is a bit of a toxic element between the main character Edie and her sort of ex-friend lover because one is responsible for putting the other one in jail. So um, it's it's a difficult dynamic, but I thought it was handled appropriately. So I personally didn't have a problem with the fact that it was a little bit toxic. I think there's a lot of banter and sort of the queer focus really made me think of The Locked Tomb by Tamsin Muir. Um, I don't know that I would consider it fluffy. Um, it's very fun. I loved it. I loved the characters. I only wouldn't consider it fluffy because it does deal with some serious things. It talks about gentrification a lot because some of these neighborhoods are being taken over by rich folks. Um, the found family crew element of it was spectacular. I loved it. There's some really annoying teenagers Edie has to deal with that I thought were hilarious. The banter just had me cackling. So if you like banter and you like sort of um like it's really unusual to see queer and person of color rep in cyberpunk, I feel like. So that was super fun to have. I really, really loved that. So I would recommend it on that as long as you're not somebody like the heist element is its weakest part. So if that's what you pick it up for, I don't know if it'll satisfy you. But I still really liked it. Um, then then the next I had like 6 novellas and then one is a DNF to talk about. So I'll just tackle all of those now. The first one is In the Shadow of the Fall by Toby Ogundiran. I feel like I never pronounce this person's last name correctly. Um, I liked this. I where would I put you? Maybe above Grace of Kings? This follows an acolyte who's basically dedicated their life to Orishas, which is part of like African mythology. I think the author is Nigerian, so there's a lot of that in there. And um essentially this acolyte is expecting to be spoken to, like picked by the Orishas after like growing up dedicating their life to them, um, and is never picked. And now they've watched like all these other people be picked by the Orishas before them. And so they finally like get fed up and do this really rash, crazy decision. And um and then there's consequences and fallout that they have to deal with from that. It does I've seen complaints about this that it feels kind of like a prequel and it definitely feels that way. It's doing a lot of setup. It's part of like a novella duology. And I think I'll be interested to pick up the second one and see if there's enough payoff, but I really liked I have not seen a lot of African mythology woven into a fantasy setting the way this did. It made me think of some of PJ Lee Clark's stuff, like Black God's Drums also has Orishas in it, and it's a really fun um, sort of like magic deity type setting, and I really like the way it played with belief in this and sort of like humans and gods trying to figure out how they fit together. So it's not really fair to call this goldfish territory, but it's also not like a new favorite. I liked it, but it'll probably depend on how the second one is for my ultimate feelings on it. So maybe I should put it, yeah, maybe I should put it here. So because I won't forget about it. It's just not quite new favorite for me. Oh boy. So, Night of the Mannequins was my second read from Stephen Graham Jones, and unfortunately, this was not a success for me. I don't think it's terrible. I've seen people that gave this 1 star and hated it, and I did not hate Night of the Mannequins. The basic premise is that, again, it's sort of like in the prank gone wrong territory, kind of similar to I Was a Teenage Slasher. But it just felt fever dreamy, and I think it's a little unfortunate that I did read some of Stephen Graham Jones' other books before this one, because I think this is has some of the same themes, but isn't doing them as well. It's very short, so it's an easy read for sure. Um, but I think you have to be okay with not fully understanding what happens by the end of it, um, and a character who's not super likable. So he's kind of an obnoxious teenage boy and doesn't improve from that. I should drink some water so I don't start coughing. Okay. The next one is a really good novella that I would recommend if you like dark fantasy, and that is The Butcher of the Forest by Premi Mohammed. Premi Mohammed, I think, is just brilliant. Um, Gorgeous prose, and do I want new favorite? I think I'm gonna put it at the top of So Close. Um, This actually kinda gave me vibes of if you combined T. Kingfisher's sort of middle-aged protagonist who's relatable, but dialed down the humor to almost none, and then, combine it with Pan's Labyrinth and that sort of very dangerous, otherworldly feel, because the main character, I think, is in her 40s, and she's the only person who has ever gone into this sort of fantastical forest and come out alive and sane, and there's a tyrant who's basically ruling the entire area, and his kids venture into the forest, and he's determined to get them back. So he basically tells the main character, "Go get them, or I will kill you and everyone you love." So it's very dark. It does have a lot of mention of war, and people having to do whatever it takes to survive around that. Obviously, with the tyrant who's ready to kill people all the time and like leaves corpses in his throne room. So like, very dark, not cozy. But I think the themes are really immaculate. The prose is absolutely gorgeous. I think what keeps this from being a new favorite for me, even though I love Mohammed's writing, is there's sort of a distance between the main character, Virus, and the reader, at least for me. Like, I didn't feel fully connected to it in the way that I would like to in order to really fall in love with the story. So, um, yeah, I haven't read a lot of Shauna McGuire, so it's harder for me to compare it. Um, I do think there's a bit of humor in Butcher of the Forest, but it's so subtle and so dry that I can't really recommend it on that basis. But I think she's a very the way Preemie handles some of these themes is so delicate and so well done and like nuanced and complicated. I just really appreciate um what she manages to do. So I loved that. Um, the lowest, I assume you mean about Night of the Mannequins, lowest average rating on my TBR. It was. So this one, if you've seen the TBR I did, that was the game board, which was so cruel to me. Um, Night of the Mannequins was the first one that was lowest rated. I hit the lowest rated square 3 times in that game. It was so rude. Um, so that was one of them. The other 2 are coming up, so I'll talk about them when I get there. I guess I should have been telling you guys what squares I used these for. Um, but yeah, I did not go in expecting to love that because 'cause it's got such a mixed reception. Um, so if you like dark fantasy, I think that, Premi Mohammed is doing very interesting things in Butcher of the Forest. She's pretty much been cemented for me as like an auto-buy author because she takes a lot of chances and does a lot of interesting things that I want to see more of, especially thematically. So I'll pick up, I have, um, she also has like a Lovecraftian horror series that I have the first book of that I really want to pick up, and then also has some short fiction that I'm hoping to pick up later this year. So I really, really like her writing style a lot. Um, okay, so the next novella that I ended up picking up was Silver in the Wood by Emily Tesh. And this one, uh, Alba's the one that put this on my TBR because um, I had not enjoyed the previous book that I read from Emily Tesh. This was actually Tesh's debut. It is, again, a novella. It's like 92 pages, super short. And it follows. There's sort of like a man in the woods in sort of a UK-esque area. I don't know that it ever specifies, but his name is Tobias, and he basically patrols the woods all the time, works with the dryads there, tries to make sure everything is above board in the forest, and then ends up getting a new landlord, Henry Silver, hence the title, Silver in the Wood. And um, Silver ends up dredging up the past in a way that leads to some problems for everybody involved. And I loved this. It was so atmospheric. I think I gave it 4.5 stars. Could I call it a new favorite? Um, I don't know. I'm gonna put it here for now, and then I can decide later. I just really loved how atmospheric this is. Like Emily Tesh's the way she talks about the woods makes you feel like you're there. I loved sort of the grumpy sunshine dynamic between Tobias and Henry Silver. I kind of thought that there would be a stronger romantic element, but that it's really a very small part of it. But you see the interactions. Tobias is very grumpy, like wild man in the woods type character. And then Henry Silver's this very chatty, flirty, scholarly type who kind of just invades Tobias's house and kind of inserts himself in his life. And it's just very fun to see their interactions. And I don't want to get into the elements of the past that get brought up because I don't want to spoil anything. But I thought it was really interesting and really fun dive into some folklore elements that made me think a little bit of Emily Wilde. It was just I absolutely loved it. Um, yeah. Yeah, I think so because I've heard so Drowned Country is the sequel novella, which I think this is just a duology. And I've heard less positive things generally about Drowned Country than I have about Silver in the Wood, but I'll be really interested to see because Henry's mother is such like a dragon in the second half of Silver in the Wood, and I know she features more in the sequel. So I'm very curious to see more of the paranormal element to that. Um, I did pick up the audio. Audible has a combo for the audio where it's both Silver in the Wood and Drowned Country. And I thought the audio narration, I can't remember the name of the guy who does it, but really good. I really, really enjoyed having that as audio, and I don't know if I would have enjoyed it as much without the audio. Yeah. She's so fun. She just doesn't take any crap at all and just bosses people around. It's great. I loved her. Yeah, I definitely think you would like that one. And like I said, the audio for the first book is like depending, I don't know how fast, you listen to audiobooks, if you do, like, 1 times I mostly do 2 times speed on audio, but, like, even if you did 1 times, it's, like, 3 hours for the first book, and then it's the whole thing is, like, 5 hours. So, it's not a long one, and it's just an easy one to binge, I think. I'm gonna pick up the sequel for sure, here soon. I don't know if it'll happen in February, but soon. Yeah, Kendrick does too. I don't know how you guys do it. Don't know. More power to you. I think it's great, and you don't like, I will admit that sometimes at 2 times speed, I miss a word here or there, but I can't handle 1 times speed at all. It's so slow. Um, so the next one, it was my history book of I'm trying to read like a history or a nonfiction every month this year because I have such a huge nonfiction collection and I'm so bad at actually reading them. Um, and so this one I'd actually heard about um, Jessica Out of the Closet is a YouTube channel that gets into a lot of queer history and fashion history. Um, and I've really enjoyed watching her videos. And she had one on the color purple and its association with lesbian culture. And so had mentioned this book, Unsuitable, which of course I can't think of what is the author's name, Eleanor Medhurst. And I really liked this quite a lot. Um, it is basically a history of lesbian fashion from Sappho, sort of ancient Greek territory, all the way up to present day, and gets into all sorts of corners of queer history that you really don't hear about very often, like the male impersonators in like I think late 1800s, early 1900s, which was fascinating. It gets into some of the like Parisian circles where you had sort of these cycles of people being open about their sexuality and then having to hide it and like being open. And it's just that evidence that people have always been there. It's like not that there's not a new thing. And it's fun to see more queer history because I don't think we get to see that very often. See people talk about that. So I thought it was really, really good. I do think you have to be into fashion history to really get a lot out of it because it is so detailed on the way that people dressed and sort of the different ways that they expressed gender and sexuality in various time periods. So, I think if you are interested in queer fashion history, I would definitely recommend it. There's a lot of really interesting commentary about the various people involved and a lot of pictures of the different women and I appreciate the way Medhurst handled some of these people that she talks about we would now potentially consider trans, but they didn't really use that language then, so she's very respectful of the way that they chose to identify, which I appreciated. So I thought that was spectacular. Again, it is going to be a niche audience, but I think if you are into that, it's very interesting. Um, then my next book is an anthology. One of my other goals for 2025 is to read anthologies because I buy them all the time. So I really do like reading short stories, and it's like a great way for me to taste test whether or not I like an author's style. Um, but I'm so bad about actually reading them. And unfortunately, this is one of the other lowest rated. I basically picked a lowest rated anthology as one of my squares, and I did not love this one. This is Cyberworld, and when I initially picked it up, I thought it was going to be cyberpunk, just based on the name and sort of the kind of android look of that cover. But it's like almost like an anti-cyberpunk where there's commentary in the introduction and the afterword about how cyberpunk is dead now, which is something I have a beef about. I don't like that as commentary. I think that the more we get into technology that actually matches up with what cyberpunk, the more important it is for us to talk about like little people against corporations and some of and like how much we integrate with technology, like those seem like things that aren't dying. So I don't know why we're talking about cyberpunk being dead. It just drives me nuts. But there's a lot of sort of climate fiction short stories in here, and almost like Black Mirror-esque elements to it. So I think if you like that, you could potentially enjoy Cyberworld. I just am salty about their opinions on Cyberpunk, and, I really liked the Stephen Graham Jones story that's in here is really fun, wild, and kind of, strange, but really fun. Um, it's definitely one you're not sure what actually happened by the end of it, but it has very strong, like, cyberpunk vibes to it. And then Alyssa Wong's story, she's just so good. I don't know. Every time I read one of her short stories, I'm blown away by how much I love how quickly she can set characters who are interesting in situations that are interesting. So hers was really good. It was sort of like a crime cyberpunk type story. So those are really good. And then there was I think it was called The Bees of Cure Body, which was also excellent. So there were like 4 gems out of this collection of like 21 stories, and the rest were kind of mediocre to me. So not the best lineup for me personally. And then I'm gonna be ending on the 2 things that did not work great for me. Um, Nothing But Blackened Teeth has, like, the lowest rating I think I have ever seen for anything, um, on Goodreads. It's like 2 I was gonna check and see real quick if Goodreads will cooperate. Like, 2 point something? Nobody likes this. Well, not nobody, but it's spectacularly low rated. Um Come on, Goodreads, you can do it. 2.65 is the average rating on Goodreads. And this is by Cassandra Kaw. So I was genuinely curious to see why people hated it so much. Um, it actually is not a DNF, shockingly. This was fine, aggressively. I so the story follows a group of friends, um, who basically, 2 of them are getting married, so they all rent out this very fancy, very old Japanese mansion in the woods, that's haunted. For some I don't why they picked that, I don't know. They're crazy, but and it's all the stuff that happens to them in this haunted house. And none of them are very likable, which you don't necessarily need in a horror for the people to be likable, but they're so toxic and it's I have it bothered me less character-wise than Night of the Mannequins. I think it's just that it's Cassandra Caw tends to, like, pull out the thesaurus, which I think is really obnoxious to people, where she's using these super long words when you really don't need to. It does kind of help with the atmosphere sometimes, but I don't know that her writing style really works for a lot of people. It didn't bother me a lot, um, but it also didn't really draw me into the story, and I didn't like a single one of the characters. They are technically friends, but only because they haven't, like, officially broken off friendships. There's a lot of, history between them and trash talking each other and all that kind of stuff, so it's, Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll try and remember that. Um, but again, I don't hate this. I don't think this is the worst haunted house story I've ever read, but I also don't find it super interesting. I think it's kind of generic and I can't get into a lot of details without it getting spoilery, but it's not even very creepy. Um, because specifically because of the way the horror is set up. It's just kind of watching people fall apart. So I understand why a lot of people don't like it. And for me, it was just like, it's a thing I've read now. I can safely get rid of it and be fine with it. Yeah, I think if there's, I have seen people give this 4 and 5 stars. And I think if what you want is sort of an exploration of toxic relationships in a uh, Japanese horror flavored way, you could potentially enjoy this, but I don't think it's bringing anything new to the table. Um, and I think the writing style is definitely a turnoff for some folks. No, it has definitely not dissuaded me from Dead Take the A Train because I think the way you've talked about it enough makes me think that the only part I'm worried about for Dead Take the A Train is that it'll be too gory for me, because I've heard a lot of commentary about how gory it is. But that one seems like it'll have fun Lovecraft elements. It has the himbo disaster sass whole thing that I love. Um, so I own that one and I definitely still wanna try it. And I would even try more from Kaw because it wasn't their writing style is not an immediate turn off. I just would rather see them tackle something that I feel like I haven't seen a million times before. So, that's my main complaint about that one. Yeah, I have low tolerance for that, so we'll see how it goes. I made it through I was a teenage slasher, and that gets gory in parts, so, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Thanks for chatting. Have fun in class. Okay, my last one is the DNF that I had left, and that's Six Gun Snow White by Catherine M. Valenti. And this one's kind of a bummer for me because it's sort of an Old West take on Cinderella where the main character is, I think, half crow. Um, and the Cinderella part is a joke because she doesn't have like the lily white skin that her stepmother wants her to have or whatever. But the writing style I bounced off of immediately. Like, I have enjoyed other Valenti books. I read one of her short story collections. I thought was really, what is it? Melancholy Musings of Mecha Girl or something like that. It's a heck of a title. Um, but I really liked that collection. It's one of the few collections that stands out in my memory. And I was really expecting to like Six Gun Snow White because I sometimes like Westerns, but it's just so Western. Like, the way the story is told is so voicey and in a way that I just found obnoxious right off the bat, so I just didn't like this at all. Um, which again was a bummer for me, but I can see why other people enjoy it, and I think if you do like westerns and you want sort of an interesting take on that, I think it's framed as like multiple fairy tales, if I remember correctly. I mean, I made it like 3 pages before I bailed out. So, did not make it far into that one, and it makes me a little bit more worried about picking up, Valenti's writing in the future, but I'll still probably try a little more before, I fully give up because I think this was just a super voicey novella. But, that was the 15 books, that I did manage to read over the course of January. I had also intended to pick up a number of others that I just didn't end up having time or energy to get to. I mean, I was never gonna make it through 20 books, but, it would have been nice if I'd gotten to like, I really wanted to get to that, Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik and Snow-Blooded, I really wanted to get to, but I think what I'll end up doing is reading those in July when I'm really craving winter weather, when it's just brutally hot. So I will read those in the future. I still have plans to read Lies of Locke Lamora and the reread The First Law. I just didn't get around to them. So hopefully I'll get to those soon. This is my very long-winded way of saying let me know if you have read any of these, what your standouts, like good and bad, were for January. Thank you, Chelsea and Alva, for joining me. It was really fun to chat with you guys, you both, over these books. And I will see you guys in the next one.